many or most of these proposals within the next 2 years. Too difficult, too polarized in this current political environment with Republicans ascendant and the president regrouping. But I think it could set the table for some big decisions that would come after the next presidential election.
John Harwood, getting it all right out there for us, and a hand grenade it is. Thank you very much. And the bottom line, of course, is that bringing the trillion-dollar federal deficit under control is going to hurt. Americans say that they're fed up with government spending. That's the result of our exit polls. But is anyone really ready to make painful choices? John Irons is Research and Policy Director at the Economic Policy Institute here in Washington. Let's talk about what you think Democrats and people who are in the progressive liberal caucus, whatever you want to call it, are likely to accept, because you have been strongly critical of these proposals head on.
Yes, well, I think the Commission needs to be commended, first of all, for taking on these issues. These are tough issues. These are long-term problems. So the work is a very valuable work to be done. Now, I think what we've seen in this beginning proposal, I think it's unfair to call this a final proposal. This is put out there for discussion. But as is, I think there's some troubles with this document, and I think a lot of the progressive members of both the Commission as well as the broader Congress are going to have a lot of trouble trying to accept some of the cuts to Social Security, cuts to discretionary spending. And I think most importantly, looking at cuts that take place pretty quickly, and that the report does not acknowledge the fact that we have a huge recession that we're trying to
Well, it does push it back beyond 2012. So they are looking to avoid a collision between the teetering economy, the fledgling recovery, whatever you want to call it, and any cuts now.
No, that's right. They do at least pay some lip service to it. But we know when you look at the economic projections, the unemployment rate in 2012, when they start the austerity, is still going to be above 9%. And so even if you look at 2012 or 2013, you're looking at an economy that's still going to be pretty weak. And we know that the weak economy is also the prime driver of these deficits, at least in the short run.
Now, let's just take it apart briefly. 15-cent gasoline tax, phased in. That's good environmental policy, as well as, some would argue, good deficit reduction.
Well, I think there are some parts of the plan which need to we need to look at it a little more closely. The 15-cent gas tax, I think, is both a good environmental policy, but could also be seen as being good for infrastructure investments, that this money does go to roads and bridges.
What about raising the retirement age eventually to 68? What would be wrong with that actuarially? We're all living longer. Eventually something is going to have to be done.
Well, I think a couple things. One is we're not all living longer. People who are wealthier, who have higher incomes, are living much longer. People who have moderate incomes, low incomes, aren't living that much longer. And I think when you look at the retirement age, what this really means is a cut in benefits. They're not changing the early retirement age, and they're not changing the average or the standard retirement age. So what this means is a across-the-board benefit cut. If you look at all their proposals for Social Security, it means a reduction for 80% of the population. They do have some sweeteners for low-income retirees, but for most people this would mean a severe cut to their Social Security income.
Well, the conversation is certainly engaged. Thank you very much for joining us on it.
Thank you.
And here now in New York, a man who strongly believes that the deficit is threatening America's future. Former Commerce Secretary Peter Peterson, founder and chairman of the Peterson Institute for International Economics and the G. Peterson Foundation. Thank you very much, Pete. We're all friends, so I think I can call you Pete. But let's talk about what you think has happened here with the beginning of this conversation. What's good about it? What's not good about it?
Well, what's good about it is there seems to be a lot of recognition that what we're dealing with here is a totally unsustainable situation. I was with Senator Kent Conrad at a press conference the other day. He said 400% of the GDP debts are just totally unthinkable and threaten the whole economy. You've heard Erskine Bowles say this is a fiscal cancer that threatens it. I heard Senator Bayh refer to this as an existential problem. So at least there seems to be more agreement that it's a big problem, and if it's as big as I think it is, it requires major solutions.
Now, what about the fact that within minutes of this being released, Nancy Pelosi said that this proposal is simply unacceptable, that any final proposal from the Commission should do what's right for our children and grandchildren's economic security as well as for our nation's fiscal security, and it must do what is right for our seniors who are counting on the bedrock promises of Social Security and Medicare. You had a similar statement from the AFL-CIO, from Rich Krumka. So are they already shutting the door, do you think, the Democrats, first of all, to any attack on entitlements?
Andrew, for years we've had the problem of people from both parties coming up with